Whenever we hear voices, I know a lot of our viewers and subscribers, I'm not alone in that they are on this channel because they've
Mhm,
had extrasensory experiences, much like I have.
mhm,
And we are really excited to hear your perspective from your field of research, all about where these voices come from and what it
mhm.
entails for us as humans who receive such powerful transmissions.
Well, yeah, I think that obviously there are two sides to this coin. There's the some of the parasitic entities that we have discussed in times past, but there are also entities that seemingly exist outside of space-time or in some kind of version of the multiverse who have an interest in sometimes verbally or even telepathically imparting revelations to our species that cause us to behave in ways that we would have never otherwise behaved in, to cause change and to orchestrate life events, entire timeline that would have never occurred if we had not been communicated with.
Hello. Nathaniel Gillis is our guest today, author and researcher of demonological theory. But I will admit that after we've been discussing off camera here, he is exploring new terrain entirely that links so many different modalities and experiences as well as research together in just one continuum, which is perfect for Zengen
Mhm.
Connections. I'm so excited to be interviewing him today. He's an accomplished author, you guys, and a researcher. His published works including A Moment Called Man and a new book that I am patiently awaiting on the edge of my seat called The Skin That Crawls. I did ask Nathaniel for a little bit of tidbit about that, and he's just uncovering so many like new sources and new perspectives that he really needs to wait on the publishing of that because it needs to include everything new so that, like we said, it's not going to be obsolete by the time it gets published. He was a contributor in the most recent Awakening Expo in the UK this past year, alongside so many other legends in this field. And he's recently been led to explore interconnected relationships between the UFO phenomena and other high strangeness associated with demons, entities, alleged angels, and other beings that inhabit and operate outside of our spectrum of visible light and this 3D world frequency. Nathaniel has recently coined a new term and tangential field of research that he refers to as necronetics, which is a combination of necromancy and genetics. I asked Nathaniel to appear and be featured today, not so that we can explore his human design body graph. I'd be really interested to know it, but that is not the focus of our chat today, you guys. I want his sincere perspective on what it means to hear voices, much like the voice heard by Ra Uru in Ibiza in 1987 at the time that he received the human design prophecy. I've also had my own experiences with clairaudience that led me to both helpful and harmful outcomes. But I'm excited to hear all of the research on this specific topic that Nathaniel Gillis has to share with us today. Welcome to Zengen Connections, Nathaniel. How are you?
It's great to be here. I'm thankful. I'm doing well, and I'm thankful to be on with you again, my friend. And I'm looking forward to discuss this subject matter.
Me too. I've just been really looking forward to diving deep into what it really means
Mhm,
whenever we hear voices. I know a lot of our viewers and subscribers, I'm not alone in that they are on this channel because they've
mhm,
had extrasensory experiences, much like I have.
mhm.
And we are really excited to hear your perspective from your field of research, all about where these voices come from and what it
Mhm.
entails for us as humans who receive such powerful transmissions.
Well, yeah, I think that obviously there are two sides to this coin. There's the some of the parasitic entities that we have discussed in times past, but there are also entities that seemingly exist outside of space-time or in some kind of version of the multiverse who have an interest in sometimes verbally or even telepathically imparting revelations to our species that cause us to behave in ways that we would have never otherwise behaved in, to cause change and to orchestrate life events, entire timeline that would have never occurred if we had not been communicated with. Now, what's so fascinating about this entire concept is some of my earliest research was centered around divine impartations, or what were deemed as divine impartations. And so in Hebrew literature, there was what's called the daughter of a voice. And that was a mystical tradition wherein some of their practitioners would fast, they would pray, they would meditate, and essentially a voice. Now, sometimes it would be auditory, other times it would be just almost telepathic, but it would give them insights into the literal construction of reality. Blew my mind because I'm thinking, okay, this can't be their imagination, right? It's not, they didn't imagine it, they didn't hallucinate. This actually occurred to them. And what's sad is that a lot of them, especially with, the hero of yours that you mentioned previously, a lot of them die before even realizing the full magnitude and weight of these revelations. And so that was one of the very precursors to my research and how it pointed to the fact that there is another world. There
Mm.
are people in that dimension, and some of them are guides. They're real guides. Now, of course, that's not to say that there aren't negative forces that would like to play the role or pray as the role of a guide. But there are certainly forces out there that instead of being parasitic, instead of just causing outright dread and horror in a life, they will impart revelations that aren't designed to confuse and confound. They're literally straight to the point. This is what it is. And these are usually documented within the mystical traditions in the world, Tibetan Buddhism, especially in the Near Eastern cultures. The idea, though, is not just that there are voices outside, but that they have an interest in communicating with our species. Without molding us in their image, there is a conversation occurring. And as of late, some of the individuals I've been working with have been trying to find ways in which they can posture themselves to where they can be in contact with these voices, with these
Mm.
life forms. And so that's when we get into contact modalities and behavioral modifications. Now, I first got introduced to that theory and that kind of work within the framework of Christianity, which is something I grew up in. I don't know where I am on it at this point.
A lot of people are waking up and having their own
Yep.
experiences,
Right.
Nathaniel, and they come from a background very similar. And,
Mhm.
that can be very disorienting.
Yep.
And I think having people, experts like yourself, to talk about it and relate to, the people perceiving them as crazy and that they
Right.
are not alone in that.
Right. Right.
That's something that a lot of us are. I didn't grow up in the Christian faith. I grew up in kind of an atheistic household, but I had a deep appreciation for many different
Mhm.
religions. And you're right. I mean, here's just a short list of all of them that refer to hearing of voices. The Prophet Muhammad, Mahatma Gandhi heard an inner
Right.
voice that spoke to him throughout his life. And then there
Mhm.
was from the Bible, Moses hearing it from the
Right.
burning bush, Paul from the Bible on the road to Damascus, Noah
Mhm.
guided by God to build the ark. And then there's,
Mhm.
Joan of Arc, obviously,
Yeah, I was thinking
the
about her today. Yes,
yeah, like there's
absolutely.
so many, and it transcends different disciplines, it transcends religions.
Right.
And it really doesn't matter which one you might be subjected to and conditioned in early childhood and beyond.
Mhm.
It's something that kind of ties everyone together in this human experience.
I agree. I agree. And to a large degree, it would seem, I mean, okay, we're not just talking about people that were taking the advice of individuals or life forms, but the down to one simple decision, changing history forever,
Hmm.
forever. I know of a man that was meditating, and he was from that tradition, the Christian tradition, but he kind of evolved out of that, I guess, according to his story. But he was meditating, and out of nowhere, he kept getting these numbers, download, like a download. He just saw numbers, and he wasn't good at math. And so, but he got inspired to be better at math. And so his story that he told me was that he was meditating and just got all these different numbers. And so one day he was at the doctor's office waiting for an appointment. He opens up the newspaper and he starts looking at the Dow Jones market. And the numbers that he was given in meditation the day before were literally just consecutively in the Dow Jones market.
Oh my
And so that's
Lanta.
when yeah, it's incredible. So that's when he realized that whatever transmission, we can say that, whatever transmission he was getting during his meditations had something to do with finance and investment banking. And so he went to, took some classes and then combined his literacy, his knowledge amassed from academia, he combined that with his meditation practice. And together, he learned how to invest. And now he's a multimillionaire.
Hmm.
Very strange stuff. Very strange stuff. So, when people usually hear my research, obviously it's centered around the darker nuances of the phenomenon. But, it's not to say that I don't look at some of the lighter aspects of it, that there are, in fact, again, beings that do have our best interests in mind. And they don't have a problem, right, downloading or at least imparting that into our species. But I can go down the list. I mean, there have been plenty of people in my own life that I've talked to who, and we can call it, see, the tradition I grew up in, they call it the gifts of the spirit. That's the only way they could frame it, right?
Yeah.
And so the stories that I was told growing up, I mean, we're talking about people that were working with angels, but and this gets even deeper and weirder, that the angel themselves had the physical appearance, the same appearance as they did. And
Hmm.
yeah, so this one particular, this is incredible. His name was Lee Stone King, but his mentor was a guy named T.W. Barnes. And he was, again, we would call them practitioners, but not in the darker, aspect of the phenomenon. But they did meditations and all that. Anyways, this individual was a faith healer. He's a healer, and so he worked with these guides on the other side, wherever that is, whatever that is, whenever. And he had a man that was sick. And this individual was dying in his bed, and he had called upon T.W. Barnes to come in and say, what, could you pray for me, or could you do something for me? I need help. And so T.W. Barnes went, stayed with him for a little bit, about maybe an hour at the hospital, went home. A week later, he gets a phone call from that same man. I just want to thank you for staying with me the entire night. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. That was not me. Yes, it was. TW, that was you. Because I remember when you walked in, he started describing his suit, his tie, his watch, everything. You had black shoes, brown socks. It was weird, but I went with it, and that's basically what it was. And so T.W. Barnes is saying that wasn't me at all. Well, it looked just like you. And so there is this weird, again, this mystical tradition that your angel bears your same physiological appearance.
Hmm.
And so this gets even deeper in the fact that it are some of our guides merely, and it's not my research, but is it possible that we are tethered into another dimension, and what we're considering a download is really impartations from our own selves? It's weird, I know.
No,
But
it's
it's
not. We're like,
almost stepping
yeah.
into a self-realization.
It's like
And
collapsing the timeline in a
right.
way. And
Mhm.
I love that you mentioned that because it's almost like, I mean, and I've heard different accounts of the exact same thing. I mean,
Mhm,
through a different lens,
mhm.
but
Right,
people actually believe that they are encountering and interacting with a version of their future self
right.
or
Now
their
that's
higher
fascinating.
self
Right.
or some other trajectory timeline of a potentiality of what they may one day become if they
Right.
follow this said guidance. I want to ask you a question. I love that
Mhm,
you gave me a term or a reference, the gifts of the spirit,
mhm,
because I took my own classes in magic, ritual, and religion when I was getting my
mhm,
anthropology degree.
mhm,
And I know one of the criteria of demonic possession
mhm.
is whenever the afflicted person knows things that they shouldn't.
Right.
They have access to information that they shouldn't have
Mhm.
access to. They know languages that they've never learned,
Right.
or some other like suchness that is unexplainable, right? How
Mhm,
do we discern between this alleged
mhm,
demonic possession of, knowing things that you shouldn't about people, about
mhm.
events, and gifts of the spirit that give you this access, like the gentleman that you were mentioning
Right.
who became a multi-millionaire at, being on the stock market. How do
Yeah.
we discern between these things?
The easiest explanation would be not just what they know, it's how they're using that information. You know, matter of fact, one of the darkest encounters I've ever heard of was from the late and great Paulino, who was a phenomenal researcher from New England. Um, Paulino was you guys can look him up. He had a show called Behind the Paranormal. It's fascinating. I was on there with him. They're great people. But anyways, he was in the seminary, and in this particular case study, he was invited by his professors to attend an exorcism. And he was pretty young in that kind of field, if you will. Like he had never been to an exorcism before. So it was pretty terrifying, as you can imagine. But he said that during the entire ordeal, he was thinking in his mind, yes, it's scary, but I don't really believe in this. Like this is bunk. This is foolish. And he's, they're putting the Bible on her head and everything. And he said inside of his brain, inside of his mind, rather, he said to himself, this is baloney. And out of nowhere, there's a term they use, demoniac. The demoniac snapped to attention. And in this case study, you'll see very quickly how it demonstrated its pathology. It said, hello, Paul. I was there when your father, let's just say, died. And I'm the one that made him pull the trigger, Paul.
Mm.
And just in that moment, you see it's not just the information. It's not just, oh, I know things I shouldn't know. It was almost like encountering a serial killer
Mhm.
where it went out of its way to put you, not just as a man, not a person, but literally as a species, to put you in place.
Mm.
To where, and this is why my latest research now, and some of the research I've been doing with other people is like, okay, why is it that all of these entities seemingly have the ability to pull from the same information? They, like for instance, I met a lady who she had a near death experience. And when I first met her, we can go through stories. I love stories, they're fascinating. But when
Me
I met
too.
her, she had a massive scar right down the front of her head. And I knew she had suffered brain damage. I knew it because you can tell. And she was awesome, awesome lady. So I'm talking to her and she's like, I know. She goes, I'm pretty scary. I'm like, no, you're not scary. I'm just at the time I was trying to sell lawn care, so I felt really bad. I was like knock on the doors, like, okay, I didn't want to bug her. And anyways, so she goes, yeah, she goes, Nathaniel, she starts telling me her story. She goes, well, I got in a car accident. And she said my head slammed against the median and it dissolved all the tissue inside of my skull to where now my brain is not held in place. She said if I fell, just barely hit my head on something, I'm out, done. And she said, but what happened to her is fascinating. She said, I don't remember much of the experience. The only thing I do remember is me waking up in another world and my deceased father staring at me. She said, I looked up at him and she said, everything was vibrant, more vibrant than this reality. She said, Nathaniel, there were callers there that do not exist in this world. And she said everything was love, everything felt wholesome. It was just amazing. I was no longer in pain. And I wanted to stay. And my father looked at me and said, it's not your time. You need to go back. And she said, well, I don't want to go back. He said, you need to go back because you have to be there for your boys. You're going to get chills. It's going to freak you out. She said, but I didn't have my twin boys for a decade.
Oh my gosh. For another
Firsthand account
decade, but
for another decade.
he knew. And he
Yeah,
told her that. I mean, there's
told her.
so many, even on like Netflix now, there's all
Mhm.
of these accounts of NDEs of very similar stories.
Mhm.
One that gave me chills was a woman who was underwater for 30 minutes in a
I can
kayaking
remember that.
accident.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
I vaguely
Where,
remember that account, but I've watched that. Yeah, I watched that interview before.
and they
Incredible.
told her that her son was not going to make it.
Mhm.
And he indeed did pass away like in another year or something.
Right.
It's uncanny and it really makes you question our free will here in the 3D
Oh,
world, does it
yes.
not?
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, because some of these entities have precognition, or at least they're almost outside. I'm going to use this term loosely, but it does fit. They're outside of the simulation. They're outside of the theater that we are so intimately connected to. And this gets back again to the idea that there are beings that are exterior who, if we are going the wrong way, because of the information they have, and I don't know if it's just foreknowledge or if it's predestination. I don't know where I'm at on that point. I don't, because the evidence suggests certainly I could go left, but they
Mhm.
want me to go right. And when I go right, you know what I mean? Things can change. And I say that because again, it's not just going left or right when you're told to, but entire timelines in history are and have been organized by an intelligence. It's
Hmm.
like Alexander the Great who wanted to invade a city, but the wall was too big. And in his diary, he writes how a flying shield descends, fires a beam of light on the wall. The light of the wall itself explodes. And then now it gives rise to him conquering the city. So it's not just okay, I'm going to give you a word or I'm going to give you revelation. It's a partnership, right?
They're
I'm going to need you to,
interfering in
right.
how the outcome plays
And
out.
that's a good word. That's a good word, interfering. And this is kind of where the research is, at least in my perspective, from my perspective, the most cutting edge research is okay, it's one thing to interact with these beings or these life forms. It's another thing to ask more profound questions like you just did. What's going on here? Are they interfering or are they assisting?
Hmm.
Or are they creating their own mythology within our species?